from Channels Television. I am Bolaji Akinwale. We're going to go into a conversation now. We'll be looking at AMCON's results, that's 2013 earnings. And to look at this with me is the CEO of Financial Derivatives Company Ltd. He is Bismark Rewane. Thank you, Bismark, for coming. Good morning.
Good morning, Bolaji.
I know that a lot of comments have been made about these new earnings from AMCON. I just want to start with, what's your own take when you first looked at the numbers?
First of all, you've got to step back and ask, what does AMCON set up to do? To make a profit or to stabilize the financial system? AMCON was set up to stabilize the financial system. So, like all bad banks, they're supposed to run up a loss in the initial years and then sell back the toxic assets into the market and make a profit over time. So you have to compute what the financial loss is and compare it against what the economic profit is. That is the way I look at it.
Okay, but people do not want to know. Sometimes maybe we forget what it's actually set up to do.
Yeah.
To clear up the toxic assets and create some kind of stability. But how do you think people should reconcile? Because when we look at the numbers, we don't think about what it's actually created to do, but want to see it in the green.
Yeah, you would see it in the green. Like every startup business, there are a number of years before you break even. Mm-hmm. So what AMCON bought assets at discounts to the face value, hold on to these assets with the interest expense, and then begins to sell down. So what has happened? 635 billion naira is a loss. The loss is less than the total profitability of the banking system. But what has happened is that banks, all the banks are solvent. There's confidence, there's liquidity, and as a matter of fact, some of those banks are now being sold to the market. You heard about the Heritage Enterprise Bank transaction. Mm-hmm. So when you take all of those things and selling of some stake in the Union Bank transaction, most of these things will not hit the books until 2014. So based on 2013 figures, based on IFRS compliance, right, this figure is an accurate picture of the financial condition of AMCON. However, it does not take into consideration the intrinsic value, which is the assets it's holding that are appreciating in value, which will be sold in the market. Some of it, which is being sold in 2014. Mm-hmm. So what you see is a trend of declining losses, which is good. But in terms of nominal values, the loss is quite significant. However, when you compare that to what it was set out to achieve in the first place, which is economic stability. So what percentage of this loss is, or percentage of the assets of AMCON, what proportion of total assets of AMCON is that of the total economy? So before rebasing, the economy was probably about 42 trillion. Now it's about 82 trillion naira. In other words, AMCON's assets are less than 10% of the total economic activities in the country. If there was no stabilizing institution, if there was a run on the banking system, if a lot of those 13,000 clients of AMCON went into liquidation and they put all those people into unemployment, what would have happened was that nominal value of economic activity would have actually declined by much more than that which AMCON is sustaining as an interim loss. Mm. So you've got to look at financial accounting, and you have to look at social and economic accounting. Now, talking
about the social benefits, I was looking at the reports that you computed, and you stated that the benefits were higher than the losses that we are reading on the just on the face value of it.
Yes, because what you do is look at the total economic activity in the country and see by how much if this economic activity had been disrupted, what would have happened? Probably would have gone into a recession. There would have been a cyclical downturn. There would have been unemployment. There would have been social unrest. There would have been a crisis of confidence and liquidity in the banking system. So rather than one stabilizing institution, you probably have about 5 or 7 or 8 financial institutions that will go down. Mm-hmm. That is very disruptive. So it's not just Nigeria. Almost all the countries that were affected by the global crisis have set up bad banks to actually detoxify the system and also sell them out in the profit. The US, for example, started off with about $400 billion, which is about 2% of total economic activity in the US, which is $16 trillion. What has happened is that now the TAP, which is called the Toxic Asset Relief Program, has now turned into a profit. after 4 or 5 years. It is expected in Nigeria it's going to take much longer. It's expected that within another 2 years, AMCON will begin to show green numbers, that is, positive numbers. They have one more bond to retire, which is the bond that is maturing in October, which is about $860 billion. That they would retire. After that, the total money supply impact would have been felt. You have about $6 trillion of, no, about 4 point something trillion naira of AMCON bonds on the central bank balance sheet, which was a central bank loan of 6%. The argument some people are putting up is that, okay, is that not part of the national debt? If you include AMCON obligations into the national debt, what happens to the national debt? The reality is that Nigeria's national debt as a percentage of GDP is one of the lowest in the world. Even if you included AMCON bonds into the national debt, it will not stagger, it will not make things change that much.
So there's no need for us to worry?
No, there's no need to panic, because it was a conscious decision to go in, to stabilize the system, and now to hold these assets and then come back into the market. I heard Rotimi Fakayo talking about the fact that AMCON bonds, not AMCON bonds, AMCON will sell equities. AMCON is not in the business of losing money. So I don't see them selling equities in the market at a time when the market is soft. You sell into strength and buy into weakness. If anything, if they had the authority, they would be buying more at this low point.
Maybe what Rotimi was trying to refer to has to do with investors' sentiment at this point, the mood in the market. Now, we've seen a downward trend so far, coupled with these numbers coming from AMCON. Perhaps investors' mood will drift further. Perhaps that was what was referring to.
Yeah, well, that's what's referring. But the reality is that people buy into weakness. So it depends on when you want to go and start buying. Active portfolio managers see value and begin to buy into it. Today, RenCap came up with this report this morning saying that Nigeria is more attractive than Kenya. And they said that stocks are selling 12 times forward earnings, which means it's quite attractive. And they had their peaks. They had about 6 banks. They had some of the fast-moving consumer good businesses and all of that. So I think there's nothing to panic about. We are still in, what they call correction territory, which is the first 10%. And then after that, you go into a bear market, and then before you get to a crash. I don't think the market will crash. I think we will go through a correction, and then probably straddle a little bit on the bear market area. But after that, there's going to be active buying, and there's going to be a lot of profit to be made after that.
We're still far from the bear market.
Yes, you are 3%, so you still have another 7% of correction to do. I don't think it will get that far before you will have a recovery. But there's insurgency, there's inflation that has gone up again, which means that there are chances that interest rates may move up in response to a high inflation environment. And also, there's currency adjustments that are likely to take place sometime next year. So institutional investors are taking their time, but to be honest with you, I think the market is slightly above fair value. That means it will correct a little bit before we start seeing a recovery. But the recovery is going to come. Okay.
I just want to ask, really, what is the state of the bad debt? Because based on the numbers that we have here, according to your reports, it says, for instance, shareholders' funds reduced from 2.55 trillion naira in 2011 to 3.27 trillion in 2012.
That's negative net worth.
Yeah, negative 3.46 trillion in 2013. Now, the company also made losses of 2.37 trillion naira in 2011, made a loss of 722 billion naira in 2012, and 635 billion naira in 2013. What are these numbers saying?
Okay, let me tell you what it means. You have to look at it in the context of the entire banking system. Before AMCON and before the intervention, the non-performing loans of the banks, 15% of their total loans were non-performing. And if you take 15% of, say, 17 trillion naira, you can imagine how much it was, right? Now, since AMCON intervention, the non-performing loans are now 5%, in fact, below 5% of total loans. Therefore, 10% of the 15 trillion naira, over 1.5 trillion naira, has been taken from non-performing area into performing. right? Those customers are now active. They're servicing their debt, right? They're not laying off people. There has been intervention. So if you take the AMCON net worth of 3.2 trillion naira loss, negative net worth, and add the value of what has been saved in terms of non-performing loans in the banking system, you see that net you are the same position. In which case, I am saying that because of AMCON's intervention and this deliberate loss, the banking system has been saved significantly in terms of, one, all the banks are performing, no depositor has lost any money, the total profitability of the banking system is far in excess of the losses we are talking about on an aggregate basis. So you've got to look at it in that context rather than looking at AMCON in isolation. I think you need to look at it in fair, on a fair value basis.